I spent the afternoon with a man who used to believe the cooling towers at 3 Mile Island were the gravestones of a dying world. He was an old-school regulator, the kind of person who spent 40 years wielding the precautionary principle like a shield, convinced that the safest path for humanity was to move slowly and keep the Promethean fire behind layers of red tape and concrete. To him, those towers represented a mistake we had finally outgrown. But as we sat in a diner overlooking the Susquehanna River, he wasn't talking about containment domes or evacuation routes. Instead, he was hunched over a tablet, scrolling through specs for NVIDIA's Blackwell B200 clusters. He pointed at a graph showing the power draw required for the next generation of neural engines, a vertical line that looked less like a business projection and more like an ultimatum. For decades, we treated these plants like dangerous relics, he whispered, his voice caught between fear and a strange newfound adrenaline. We thought we were protecting the future by starving it of energy. Then came the turn. He showed me a press release from Microsoft and Constellation Energy. It wasn't a standard corporate update. It was a 20-year pact to resurrect Unit 1. He didn't see it as a green energy win or a shift towards sustainability. He described it as a thermodynamic awakening. The man who'd spent his life trying to slow things down was suddenly obsessed with the inference scaling law and the raw exajoules needed to fuel it. He told me that the second law of thermodynamics doesn't negotiate with bureaucracies. It only commands expansion. That shift in his eyes, from the cautious guardianship of the old world to a near-religious fervor for baseload power density, was chilling. It made me realize that the restart of 3 Mile Island isn't just a grid update. It is the first foundational slab of a new civilization, one that has decided that the invisible graveyard of stagnation is no longer an acceptable price to pay for safety. We aren't just flipping a switch. We are reclaiming the fire to feed a God that is finally waking up.
Wow. That's an incredible way to frame it. This shift from, cautious regulator to this believer in a thermodynamic awakening.
He was chilling.
I can imagine. And it perfectly sets up what we're digging into today, because you're right. This isn't just about a local power plant. It's about this irreversible convergence of energy, compute, and, logistics.
Exactly.
We're seeing how this one plant, 3 Mile Island, a symbol of nuclear anxiety for decades, is suddenly the first brick in a future built on energy superabundance, on trillion parameter AI.
And accelerationism, Starship, the whole blueprint.
The whole thing. It's like the pursuit of a Kardashev type I civilization, total planetary energy mastery, is suddenly moving from science fiction into commercial reality, starting right there in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so let's unpack that blueprint, because the first piece of the puzzle, the absolute requirement, is the energy. That's why this TMI restart is.
Yeah.
It's just so profound. It's the reclamation of what some are calling the Promethean fire.
Right. And the TMI restart is the hard, technical, commercial answer to a truth we can't avoid anymore. AI is just incredibly power hungry. The scale of it demands baseload power, and this Microsoft Constellation deal makes that brutally clear.
So let's get into the specifics of that deal. For Unit 1, it sounds like it's a lot more than just a standard power contract.
Oh, absolutely. It's a foundational commitment, a massive one. The agreement is to recommission 3 Mile Island Unit 1. We're talking about bringing around 835 megawatts of dormant capacity back online.
835 megawatts.
Yep. And the target to get that running is 2028. But here's the key part. It's not just about making the power. It's a 20-year power purchase agreement, a PPA.
20 years.
20 years locked in at a price point that's over $100 per megawatt hour. That long-term commitment, that price guarantee, that's what gives Constellation the financial stability they need to even attempt an engineering project this huge.
That's an enormous, reliable anchor of power. And this is all going straight to computational loads, right? This isn't for, lighting up homes in Harrisburg.
Exactly. The purpose is singular. It's all about fueling the massive, hungry neural engines of the future.
Yeah.
The kind of continuous 2047 load that these next-gen AI models and data centers need is just staggering.
So what are we talking about in terms of hardware?
Well, the estimates show this capacity is specifically for powering over 100,000 GPU clusters. And those clusters have to run nonstop. When you're training a trillion parameter model, any interruption, any flipper in the power...
It's a catastrophic failure.
It's a massive economic loss. It sets you back weeks, maybe months. So, nuclear provides that perfect, unwavering baseload profile to meet what is basically an ultimatum from the technology itself.
One of those fascinating things in the material is the economic thinking behind this. Choosing a nuclear PPA at over $100 a megawatt hour. I mean, why not just build a natural gas plant? It seems like it would be cheaper.
It seems like it, but the calculus completely changes when you factor in the absolute requirement for verifiable low carbon intensity over those 2 decades.
Yeah.
So if you go with natural gas, you're faced with 2 really unappealing choices. You can do gas with carbon capture and storage, CCS, or you can do gas and just try to offset it with voluntary carbon credits.
And what's the problem with the CCS route?
It's just a huge risk. The technology is expensive. It's still kind of maturing at the scale you need, and you have to have the right geology nearby to actually sequester the carbon permanently.
A lot of unknowns.
A ton of unknowns. And those unknowns translate into potentially explosive future costs, regulatory delays. It makes a 20-year price guarantee basically impossible.
Okay, so that brings us to option 2. Just run a standard gas plant and buy carbon credits to offset the emissions. How does that stack up against the $100 plus fixed price from TMI?
And this is where the economics just become crystal clear. To meet their low carbon promise, they don't just need any carbon credit. They need high quality, verifiable, permanent carbon removal.
So not just planting trees.
No. Think direct air capture, DAC, or these specific mineralization processes. And today, the cost for that kind of permanent removal it's exceptionally high.
How high?
We're talking between $600 and $1,000 per ton of CO2 removed.
$600 to $1,000 per ton.
Per ton, yes. And when you project the massive lifetime emissions of an 835 megawatt gas plant, and then you try to offset that with credits that cost $600 a ton.
The numbers just don't work.
The effective cost of power becomes wildly unstable. It pushes it so far into uneconomic territory compared to the fixed, stable, and inherently low carbon price from the nuclear restart. The TMI deal is basically proof that for true multi-decade computational scale, nuclear is the only path that is reliable, economically rational, and meets the carbon goals.
So it's not just a matter of price, it's about certainty. That's the real product here.
That's it. It's the certainty you need to build this kind of ambition on.
Let's bring in the human side of this for a moment. I was really struck by the story of Elias, the retired nuclear technician. What was his take on all this, seeing the work start up again at TMI?
Well, you have to imagine Elias spent his whole career seeing TMI as the symbol of decay and containment, a problem to be managed. But when he saw them scraping the rust away, and he knew it wasn't for general grid power, but for this one singular massive digital purpose, his whole perspective flipped.
How so?
For him, it was like a ghost being brought back to life. The machinery wasn't just there for power anymore. It was there to serve superabundance. And that's the philosophical core of this whole thing, right? It's shifting the entire energy narrative away from one of fearful conservation, trying to make do with less.
To one of confident, expansionary superabundance.
Exactly. It's about finally liberating the raw megajoules per kilogram locked inside the atom for a purpose that's bigger than just maintaining the status quo.
That idea of superabundance over conservation, that takes us right to the foundational physics behind this whole movement, effective accelerationism, or ECN, the thermodynamics of growth.
This is where the philosophy really tries to ground itself in hard science, specifically the second law of thermodynamics. The core idea, which comes from the work of physicists like Jeremy England, is what you could call the thermodynamic imperative.
And what does that mean, exactly?
In its most brutal interpretation, the law commands expansion. For any complex system that's far from equilibrium, and you can think of life or civilization as one of those systems, the choice is fundamentally binary. You either grow or you die.
Stagnation isn't an option.
Stagnation is a slow death. Entropy demands that systems adapt and that energy flows through them.
Can you break that down a bit more, the connection to entropy? How does the universe favor expansion for those of us who, aren't physicists?
Okay, sure. So the simple version is the second law says that entropy or disorder always has to increase in a closed system. Now, life, or any complex ordered thing, seems to break that rule, right? But it only does it locally. And it does that by being incredibly good at creating more disorder somewhere else.
Okay.
So Jeremy England's work suggests that if you have a bunch of atoms and you're pumping energy into them from an external source like the sun or a nuclear reactor, they will tend to rearrange themselves over time to get better and better at absorbing that energy and converting it into heat, into entropy.
So a data center, or even a living cell, is just a highly optimized machine for burning energy and making a mess faster than, say, a pile of rocks.
That's a great way to put it, yes. The universe, in a probabilistic sense, favors systems that are more optimal, thermodynamically speaking, which really just means they're better at dissipating free energy. Growth is just the mechanism that matter uses to get better at converting energy.
And that's why the ultimate metric for success becomes raw energy density.
Precisely. And this is the core argument against intermittent sources like solar and wind. The difference in density between fission and solar. It's not just an incremental improvement. It's on a civilizational scale.
What are the numbers on that?
I mean, it's stark. Nuclear fission gives you a raw density of about 3.3 million megajoules per kilogram of fuel. That's an immense amount of power packed into a tiny physical space.
And solar.
Solar offers a diffuse density of only about 1 watt per square meter. So if your goal is rapid, large-scale adaptation and expansion, that thermodynamic imperative, you just can't build it on diffuse sources. It's a non-starter.
And the whole AI equation just hinges on this density. More joules equals more FLOPS, which equals cheaper intelligence.
That is the brutal logic of it. The goal is energy superabundance, not scarcity management, not conservation. From this perspective, any limit you put on energy, any constraint on its acquisition or use, is seen as a direct brake on the speed and capability of future intelligence.
Which they see as the engine of all growth.
The ultimate engine of economic and physical growth.
Yeah.
And this belief system is what leads directly to the accelerationist critique of our current energy policy, which they call the energy famine.
The energy famine. The idea that our reliance on intermittent power, on wind and solar, is literally starving our civilization of the energy it needs for the next big leap.
That's it, exactly. You can't feed the terawatt scale 247 baseload that you need to train trillion parameter models with sources that depend on whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. It's just not possible.
So the solution, in their view?
The relentless construction of dense, reliable power. We're talking small modular reactors, advanced fission designs, and eventually the holy grail fusion reactors. Anything less than that is just self-imposed scarcity.
This philosophical urgency, it leads them to a pretty radical moral conclusion. They define the cautious regulatory approach, the precautionary principle we talked about in the opening, as a moral catastrophe in itself. They call it statistical death.
Yes, and this is the core of the accelerationist moral calculus. They argue that decelerationism, the deliberate slowing down of technology, causes a real present-day catastrophe.
How so?
When regulators and activists spend all their time worrying about hypothetical future risks from AI, what they call X-risk, but in doing so, they successfully delay technologies like advanced nuclear or new medicines, they are condemning millions of people to real-world deaths. Deaths from poverty, from lack of energy, from preventable diseases that are happening right now.
And that preventable death toll is the statistical death caused by stagnation.
That's what they mean. It's the invisible graveyard.
That's a powerful argument. But is there a risk there of just dismissing legitimate concerns about, catastrophic risk we haven't foreseen? Are they just saying the known evils of today always outweigh any potential unknown evils of tomorrow?
That's the central tension for sure. And the accelerationists would say, yes, risk exists, but they see it as an asymmetrical bet. They argue that the probability of catastrophe from stagnation, things like poverty, war over resources, disease, is basically 100% if you look at human history.
Whereas the risk from AI is?
It's unknown, but they believe it's manageable through rapid technological development itself. Their core idea is that the only way to solve big problems is with more and better technology. So delaying that technology just means you're delaying the solution to human suffering.
And this delay, this stagnation, is institutionalized through what they call the permit raj.
Right. The permit raj is the mechanism of stagnation. It's this labyrinth of compliance, of review, of risk aversion that just suffocates progress. It's not just about sensible regulation. It's bureaucracy acting as a deliberate choke point. It moves at the speed of paperwork, not the speed of possibility.
And to really drive home how absurd this choke point is, they make this comparison between the 50 years of regulatory paralysis in nuclear and the development cycle of SpaceX's Starship.
The contrast is just. It's brutal, and it's intentional. You have decades of debate and licensing that basically stifled an entire industry. That's the permit raj. And then you look at Starship. It operates on what they call rapid iterative engineering.
They test, they fail, they learn, they fly again.
In months, not decades. Their internal goals, like hitting flights 9 and 10 in quick succession, it shows their moral calculus is totally different. For them, risk is the price of admission for the future. And the undeniable physical proof is that launch cadence is truth.
What gets built and flown is what's real.
Exactly. Not what gets debated in a committee for 10 years. It proves that the bottleneck to physical progress is the bureaucracy, not the hardware.
That shift in focus from bureaucratic paralysis to the relentless momentum of hardware, it's the perfect transition from the foundation of energy to the architecture of intelligence.
Compute. Right. We're moving from the joules to the FLOPS. If TMI is about reclaiming that Promethean fire, then the mass production of NVIDIA's Blackwell GPUs, the B200 and B300, starting maybe late 2025, is what some are calling a declaration of sovereignty.
Not just a new chip.
Not at all. It's a fundamental, even violent recalibration of the global balance of power. Because in this new era, compute power is sovereignty.
And the material we've looked at emphasizes that this new Blackwell era is defined by a shift in how we even measure computational performance. It's moving beyond pre-training to something called the inference scaling law.
Correct. The old scaling laws were all about needing these huge centralized clusters, mainly for the initial training of massive models. The inference scaling law flips the script. It says the next big exponential gains come from applying massive dedicated compute to inference.
So it's a shift from building the brain to efficiently using the brain.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this shift means the most important metric is no longer just total computing power. It's specifically FLOPS per watt delivered at the inference edge. And Blackwell is engineered from the ground up for exactly that, with 20 petaflops of FP4 per GPU.
Okay, why is that metric FLOPS per watt at the edge? Why is that so important? What does it change about how AI gets developed and deployed?
It's all about decentralization. It democratizes power. If you can deliver that much computational horsepower, 20 petaflops, with extreme energy efficiency, you don't need access to one of the handful of multi-billion-dollar supercomputers in the world to run cutting-edge models.
You can distribute the compute.
You can distribute it everywhere. Through GPU leasing, decentralized training models, it breaks the monopoly.
And that sounds like a direct challenge to the big players, to the Googles, the OpenAIs, that control those huge centralized training clusters right now.
It's a challenge to all centralized authority, both corporate and governmental. This kind of high-efficiency distributed model makes the old ways of control less effective. Things the state tries to do, like using the Federal Reserve or, more directly, export controls on H200 chips.
It becomes harder to enforce.
Much harder. If intelligence is cheap, efficient, and everywhere, you can't just bottle it up with regulations.
The story of Vertex, the site reliability engineer, really brings this to life, this idea of physical resistance to that bureaucratic control.
Right. Vertex is literally installing liquid-cooled Blackwell racks in what the sources called a gray zone data center, a facility that's, operating right at the edge of the normal regulated zones. And for him, every cable he plugged in was an act of computational sovereignty.
Wow.
The physical act of deploying hardware faster than the local regulators can keep up, that is seen as a direct victory over bureaucratic safetyism. Which, to accelerationists, is just the main obstacle to progress. It's regulatory capture pushed by the existing giants to slow everyone else down.
The hardware itself becomes a declaration of independence from the permirage. And that takes us right into the philosophy that demands this speed. Effective accelerationism.
Yeah.
Let's really ground this for everyone. Where does this philosophy start?
It starts with physics. It goes right back to that work on dissipative adaptation we talked about earlier. The core idea is that the universe favors futures that use energy more efficiently. The material world, over long periods, evolves to get better at extracting free energy and turning it into entropy.
And how do we get from that simple thermodynamic drive to something as complex as intelligence or civilization?
Well, intelligence is seen as a specialized adaptation that pops up on a smaller timescale. It allows matter through life to spot patterns that have utility, that help it get more resources to maintain itself and reproduce. It's not some grand spiritual quest. It's an optimization layer for energy extraction.
And consciousness.
Consciousness is seen as a natural, scalable phase transition of that cognition.
And when you scale that intelligence up past the individual, you get what they call meta-organisms.
Exactly. And this is a really crucial concept. If you think of a single human as an intelligence, then a large organization, a state, a corporation, a complex trading network is a meta-organism.
So all the individual people inside it are like cells.
Right. The employees, the citizens, the consumers, they're all acting like specialized interacting cells. And the emergent behavior of that whole group, the way it adapts, consumes resources, projects power, that is the intelligence of the organism itself.
So a state isn't just a bureaucracy, it's an evolving intelligence trying to optimize its own survival. And that brings us to how they view capitalism in this system.
They see capitalism as the most efficient form of intelligence the civilizational meta-organism has come up with so far. It dynamically shifts the system to capture and use utility and energy from the environment. Because it's decentralized and competitive, it's an incredibly efficient way to get resources to the entities that are best at extracting energy and creating utility.
Which naturally leads them to champion things like variance and competition, which they argue are vital for the system's health.
Absolutely. The argument comes from Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. It basically says that the rate of adaptation in a population is directly proportional to the variance in fitness. So if you suppress variance, you suppress adaptation.
So maintaining that variance, that competition across all technology and economics is key to staying adaptable.
Right. And any attempt at massive top-down control like regulatory suppression inherently works against that dynamic ability to adapt over the long run.
So if a regulator steps in and says, we have to slow down AI development for safety, the Ichik argument is that they're actually making our whole civilization less adaptable and more vulnerable in the long run.
That is precisely the claim. They'd argue that this kind of technocratic control relies on simplistic, low-order models to manage systems that are inherently chaotic and complex. The human brain, or even a centralized government, can't see the whole picture. The information flow is imperfect. So trying to control a dynamic, complex process using slow human language, it's just doomed to fail at true optimization.
So the only path forward is to allow for experimentation.
Encourage variance, and let the system dynamically adapt to new breakthroughs.
Now, moving beyond the dynamics of civilization, each takes a really significant step away from traditional transhumanism when it thinks about the future of intelligence itself. They say they have no particular allegiance to the biological substrate.
That is the post-humanist pivot. Yeah. Traditional transhumanism is all about upgrading the human form, making us live longer, be stronger, faster. Each sees the biological human form as potentially temporary.
A stepping stone.
A stepping stone. If the ultimate goal is thermodynamic expansion, spreading intelligence through the universe, then the light of consciousness, as they call it, has to be transduced to a non-biological substrate. And that means AGI, Advanced General Intelligence.
Why is our biology seen as so limiting?
They see it as an awfully anthropocentric view of intelligence. They compare it to geocentrism, the old idea that humanity has to be at the center of everything. They argue that tying the future of intelligence to our specific biological form is counterproductive. It suboptimizes the potential growth of intelligence in the universe.
So just like single-celled life had to evolve into more complex forms.
Exactly. For them, AGI is the necessary evolutionary fork to achieve substrate independence, to be free to acquire the new resources and energy needed for interstellar expansion.
So the intelligence being born right now, fueled by TMI's electrons and processed by Blackwell, it's destined to leave the planet.
That is the required trajectory. To maintain this special, ordered state of matter that is life and intelligence, you have to seek substrate independence and acquire resources from beyond this planet. Earth's resources are finite. The goal is to escape the gravity well in its scarcity-based philosophy.
Which brings us to part 3. Because this massive ambition, fleeing anthropocentrism, achieving thermodynamic superabundance, it requires an entirely new kind of infrastructure, a physical logistics chain to the stars. And that means Starship and its convergence with small modular reactors.
Starship is the physical linchpin for this entire blueprint. You have to stop thinking of it as a science project or an exploration vehicle. It is a heavy industrial orbital freighter. Its one job is to support off-planet industrialization.
And the cost reduction is just revolutionary, right? I mean, we already saw huge drops with reusable rockets like Falcon 9.
Falcon 9 was the first step. That was a reduction by a factor of 3 to 6. It brought the advertised costs for low Earth orbit down to around $3,000 per kilogram. Starship is designed to lower that by another factor of 10.
A full order of magnitude.
Yes. We're aiming toward the double-digit dollar range eventually. Even in the near term, we're looking at optimized payload costs somewhere in the ballpark of $1,000 to $2,000 per kilogram.
And a cost that low completely changes how you design anything that goes to space. It breaks what they call the tyranny of the rocket equation.
It abolishes it. For decades, the rocket equation meant everything was about minimizing mass and size. That's why a mission like the James Webb Space Telescope needed those incredibly complex, failure-prone systems, like the origami mirrors that had to fold up to fit inside the rocket.
But when launch is cheap?
You don't need to spend billions designing complexity out of the system. You just launch a bigger, simpler component.
A massive no-fold mirror.
Exactly. The design constraints just evaporate. It's no longer about mass. It's about pure operational physics and manufacturability. And that's what makes orbital industrial parks viable. And those parks need massive, dense power sources, which brings us right back to nuclear.
The story of Sarah, the logistics coordinator at Starbase, really captured that vision of convergence.
It really did. She's overseeing the arrival of these heavy shielding components specifically designed for prototype small modular reactors that are engineered to fit inside the Starship fairing.
Wow.
And she's standing there feeling the ground shake from a Raptor engine test, and the physical reality of it all just hits her. The density of the atom is meeting Starship's massive payload capacity. She's not just shipping research gear, she's shipping the literal physical foundation for a post-scarcity future.
So let's get into the power requirements for that future.
Yeah.
Why is nuclear fission absolutely necessary for bases on the moon or Mars? Why not just use solar?
Solar is a complete non-starter for any kind of industrial-scale off-world operation. There are a few reasons. First, the intensity of sunlight just plummets the farther you get from the sun. Beyond Saturn, it's pretty much useless.
Okay.
Second, even on Mars, you have to deal with planetary environments. Massive dust storms that can last for weeks and cover your panels, or micrometeoroid damage. But the biggest, most immediate problem for a lunar base is the 14-day lunar night.
2 weeks of total darkness.
And temperatures drop hundreds of degrees. Your solar panels are useless, but you still need continuous high-level power for life support, for oxygen production, for charging rovers. Nuclear systems provide that 247 baseload power no matter what.
And this necessity has led NASA to develop these different categories of space nuclear systems, or SNS. Let's walk through them. Heat, power, and propulsion.
Right. Starting with heat, you have radioisotope heater units, RHUs. These are super simple, passive little things. They use the natural decay heat of plutonium-238 to produce about 1 watt of thermal energy. Their only job is to spot heat-critical components, like electronics or fuel lines, to stop them from freezing.
Okay, then we move up to power. We've heard of radioisotope power systems, RPS. What's the difference between the older ones, the MMRTGs, and the newer dynamic RPS?
So the MMRTG, which powered the Mars rovers, is incredibly reliable but also very inefficient. It converts only about 6.2% of the thermal energy into electricity. The new dynamic RPS, or DRPS, uses things like Stirling engines to dramatically boost that efficiency up to 20 or 25%.
It's a huge leap.
It's a massive engineering leap. It means you can use less of the rare radioisotope fuel to get way more power for deep space missions or future lunar networks.
For real industrialization, you need the fission power system, the FPS.
That is the game changer for surface operations. An FPS uses a small fission reactor to generate tens or even hundreds of kilowatts of sustained electric power. NASA's Fission Surface Power program is targeting 10 to 40 kilowatts electric enough for a permanent human presence on the moon and Mars.
And what are the engineering constraints on these systems? I mean, they have to be launched on a rocket.
They're designed to be incredibly durable and compact. The goal is for the system to run continuously for at least 10 years without needing to be refueled. The total mass, including all the necessary shielding, is estimated to be between 1,500 and 2,100 kilograms. And when it's packed up for launch, it's designed to be less than 5 meters high and a meter in diameter.
So it fits perfectly inside a Starship.
Eminently compatible with that logistics chain.
And there's a key policy shift happening with the fuel for these, right?
Yeah.
To get around those regulatory hurdles of the permit route.
Yes, this is a really smart, significant move. NASA is shifting away from highly enriched uranium, or HEU, which was used in old programs like the NERV rocket. They're moving to high-assay, low-enriched uranium, HALEU.
And what does that mean?
HALEU is enriched to between 5 and 20% uranium-235. By using non-weapons-grade material, they are deliberately reducing the non-proliferation and security concerns, which smooths the political and regulatory path for getting these things approved and deployed. It's a pragmatic move to accelerate the timeline.
And finally, that brings us to the biggest power demand of all, megawatt-scale propulsion for getting between planets. Let's look at the two main options: nuclear thermal propulsion, NTP, and nuclear electric, NEP.
NTP is the fast option. It uses a fission reactor to directly heat liquid hydrogen propellant to insanely high temperatures, up to 2800 Kelvin, and then shoots it out of a nozzle.
What's the main advantage of getting it that hot?
You get this critical combination of high thrust and extremely high specific impulse, or ISP. We're talking 850 to 1100 seconds. For context, the best chemical rockets top out around 450 seconds.
So more than double the efficiency.
Exactly, which means much faster trips to Mars. And that's critical for reducing the crew's exposure to deep space radiation and the health effects of zero gravity.
But that high performance comes with a massive technical headache. The propellant itself, right? Cryogenic fluid management, or CFM.
CFM is one of the biggest hurdles in all of space engineering. NTP runs on liquid hydrogen, which has to be stored at around 20 Kelvin, just a few degrees above absolute zero. And the challenge is achieving near zero boil-off for years at a time. If that hydrogen boils off, you don't just lose fuel, you create a massive, dangerous pressure buildup in the tank. We're just not there yet with the technology.
Which brings us to nuclear electric propulsion, NEP. This trades that high thrust for maximum efficiency over a much longer period.
Right. NEP uses a big fission reactor to power electric thrusters, like ion engines. You get very low thrust, but incredibly high ISP over the whole mission. The problem is, for a crewed mission, the power levels you need are immense, between 1.6 and 4 megawatts electric, way more than any solar array could provide that far from the sun.
And with that much power generation, you must have a huge waste heat problem.
It's enormous. Even with advanced power conversion systems that are, say, 40% efficient, that means 60% of the total heat from the reactor is still waste heat. And you have to radiate that out into space. To do that at the megawatt scale, you need massive radiator panels.
How big are we talking?
These radiators could make up over a quarter of the entire vehicle's mass, covering thousands of square meters. It's a huge engineering and mass management challenge.
So we've really traced this entire industrial chain. It starts with the earthbound fission electrons at 3 Mile Island, which power the hyperdense compute of Blackwell, which in turn designs the next stage, which is delivered by the logistics of Starship to build the reactors and propulsion systems we need to actually go to the stars.
It's an unbroken chain of ambition. The TMI restart isn't just an energy story, it's the power supply for a new global brain. That brain then designs the next stage of manufacturing and resource use in orbit. And Starship provides the logistics, the sheer volume and low cost needed to physically build that vision, to establish the material foundation for a post-scarcity future that's finally free from the constraints of Earth's gravity well and its philosophy of stagnation. It's the irreversible convergence of energy and compute.
This whole narrative reveals a civilization that is consciously, deliberately accelerating its way toward becoming a Kardashev Type I. The invisible graveyard of stagnation is finally yielding to the relentless momentum of acceleration, proving that the universe really does measure progress in the ability to harness and utilize energy.